Okay, it's been a while since we've done this again, but we're back for more Silent Ponyville. Unfortunately, I didn't have the quietest of roommates or time to do it last semester, so we're gonna do a little bit of reading now to make up for that. The world was quiet. Her hair floated around her face. She didn't feel the sting of her wounds here. Everything felt the same like this. It seemed almost as if all her cares were a mile away. The last of her oxygen left her mouth and flew past her face. Her lungs began to burn. She wanted to hold it for a little longer, but her body defied her. Pinky gasped, taking in a huge breath of air as she resurfaced from the bucket of water. She panted heavily as she tried to relax and calm her beating heart. She had just survived staring death in its face. That thing, that monster, that slender pony. She knew just getting close to it was a death wish. When it had gotten close to her mind had fallen into a haze unlike she'd ever experienced before. Then there was the head-splitting pain. She gingerly touched her re-wrapped head wounds. The cuts from the attack in her room had started to heal, but the slender pony had left a deep gash down the middle of her forehead. But she'd survived. The cut only stung a little now, and that would fade soon. The bandages on her leg also needed to be changed. All that running had reopened the bite wound, and her leg was currently throbbing as it recovered. She shook her head and mane, casting water off her head. The soak had relaxed her some, but she was still inside that school. The school where she had been chased inside of that only word that came to her mind that she could describe it as other world, one that was separate yet almost the same. She lowered her head and started gulping down the bucket of water. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was at first, but she remembered how much crying and running had been doing, and suddenly her throat felt as dry as a desert. She very quickly emptied the bucket of its contents. Her tongue lapped at the bottom of the bucket expectantly, but there was no more water to be had. She softly sighed as she pulled her head back up and looked around at the empty cafeteria she was in. She was able to imagine back when it was in pristine condition, all the little foals that would gather around eating lunch as they took a break from their day of learning. Friends would share gossip, stories, adventures, and the games that they were played at home. Some would doodle, some would spend time by themselves. But lunchtime and recess were always the fool's favorite part of school. The days are long gone in this place, aren't they? Pinky sighed as she stared at the empty, dust-covered room. The tables had been emptied and abandoned for a long time now, and no foals visited these halls. Even the brief glimpse at the playful ghost foals had gone away and left an empty silence. She took a soft breath and picked up a red ribbon she had taken it off to soak her head. She gently tied it into a bow at the end of her mane once more. She was growing very fond of this ribbon, not only because of being a gift from Gummy. It seemed to give her a sense of normalcy during these calm moments, when she just had time to herself. It seemed to put her mind a bit at ease just knowing it was there. "I guess," she said, taking a deep breath and turning her head, "all that's left to do now is open this box," she said, looking at the brown box that sat next to the bucket. She hadn't looked inside of it. In fact, she had wanted to leave it there. Even more, she just wanted to smash it. She wanted to destroy the box. Anything that Slender Pony had to offer just made her stomach twist in anger. But forces beyond her understanding compelled her to to bring it with her. She had put it down to get some water, and now that she had finished it, it sat there mocking her. Maybe if I smash it after I find out what's inside, she reasoned with herself, giving herself enough confidence to finally open it. She carefully lifted up the brown lid, half expecting it to burst into fire upon touching it. The lid slipped off easily as she looked inside. "Why is this in here?" she said as she stared in shock at what sat in the box. It was the key to Sugar Cube Corner. Why would he have left this? Why would he give it to me? The question racked Pinky's mind, but no answers came. She had just come from that area, after all, and all her home was right above Sugar Cube Corner. "I can't believe I forgot to check on the store itself," Pinky kicked herself mentally. She looked at the key again, then remembered what she had seen in her room and sighed. "No, I can't believe I didn't check it. Not after that filly attacked me. I did want to get out of there as quickly as I could. She carefully picked up the key and placed it in her bag. She had to go back and find out what had happened at Sugar Cube Corner now. She then carefully replaced the lid on the brown box before picking it up and dropping it on the ground. She lifted up her good leg and smashed the box under her hoof, and let it off a satisfying crunch as she crushed it. Snow started to pile up thickly at her hooves. The town looked like it had a white blanket covering it. Every part of the town had snow in it. The streets, the roofs, the trees. Pinky had never seen a town covered in snow this way before. There had always been ponies that made sure the town was still usable during the winter, clearing the streets and making sure the snow didn't pile up too thickly. Each step gave a crunch in the snow as the hooves sank underneath her. She shivered even more now, wishing she had brought some winter clothes to keep warm. Normally she did well in the cold, but the snow kept wetting her coat. She could feel the ice starting to form at the base of her legs. Sugar Cube Corner finally came into view. She sighed in relief. She had seen groaners in the distant fog, but none had come close to her. She managed to make it here only suffering from the cold. She went to the door of her favorite bakery and gently tried to open it. The door was locked, as she expected, so even if she had tried to check on it earlier, she would have had to move on. She carefully pulled the key to the store out of her bag and placed it into the lock. The door unlocking, Pinky watched as the keys turned to ash, just as the school key had before it. She let out a soft sigh as she pushed open the door, stepping inside. As she expected, Sugar Cube Corner was dark, just like her room had been. A scant amount of light entered the room as she looked around. She quickly reached into her bag, pulling out the lantern. She was thankful she had refilled it with oil back at the cafeteria as she set the flame alight. To her surprise, Sugar Cube Corner looked fine. There were no pastries on the shelves or on the counters, but there was a lack of dust and decay. In fact, the place was even decorated. There were ribbons and banners and balloons set up around the shop. There was a table set up for holding snacks and punch, several games in various locations, as well as piles of presents on another table. There was a banner tied from one pole to the other saying, read, "Welcome, Pinkie Pie." "Are these decorations for me?" she asked, placing her lantern down so it could illuminate the room. "Oh, do we have a guest? I love guests," came a voice that sounded all too familiar. Pinkie stopped as she looked around. She hadn't heard any pony's voice since she entered this horrible place, and she was suddenly filled with hope. "Yes, you do have a guest. It's me, Pinkie Pie." Pinkie Pie quickly called out in excitement, waiting for the other pony right now. "Where are you? Come on out. I promise not one of those monsters outside." "Oh, really?" the voice chuckled. "It's just so hard to tell these days who and who isn't a monster," the voice said cheerfully. "Please, will you come out? I'd really like to see your face," the Pinkie said. She didn't care that the voice sounded familiar. She wanted to see the pony. "Okie dokie Loki, since you asked so nicely." A blob of darkness in the corner of the room began to move. It seemed to manifest in the form of a pony before Pinkie's eyes. The shadows surrounding the pony faded as light soon gave her form. Pinkie gasped in shock and covered her mouth with her hoof. "What's the matter? You seem surprised to see me. You said your name was Pinkie Pie, right? What a coincidence! My name's Pinkie Pie, too." There was no doubt about it. The bright pink coat, the frizzled-up curly mane and tail, the blue and yellow balloons cutie mark, the bouncing bubbly attitude, it was Pinkie Pie. "But that's going to get confusing if we both start calling each other Pinkie Pie," she explained, as she stopped bouncing for a moment, thinking about it. "We should give you a nickname." What? But I'm..." She couldn't think of anything to say. Why was there two of her? And this Pinkie didn't seem to be suffering at all from any sadness and despair. She wasn't covered in any bandages, and she didn't look hurt. This Pinkie looked exactly like she did before her nightmare started to affect her, and this town wasn't helping her. "Oh, I see your hair's down. What does it mean you're sad? You must be. The only time my hair goes down is when I'm sad. We call you Sadie Pie." The happy version of Pinkie bounced again. "Why are you so sad, Sadie Pie? Did someone steal your sweets? You can always make more, you know," she giggled merrily. "Oh, I know. We'll turn that frown upside down. Let's have some cupcakes." Cupcakes?" she asked a little hesitantly. "But I want to get out of this town." "Aw, you want to go?" Pinkie Pie said, tilting her head. "But you only just got here. Come on, there's so much more fun for us to have." She bounced over to a door at the side of Sugar Cube Corner, one that led to the basement. She opened the door and then turned back around. "Come on and follow me. We'll have lots of fun. We'll make some of those cupcakes." The happy Pinkie Pie bounced into the darkness of the stairs, disappearing from sight. Pinkie stared in disbelief as the second Pinkie Pie disappeared from her sight. She couldn't believe her own eyes. Surely there's only one Pinkie Pie, right? She had to find a way out of there was the second Pinkie Pie. She grabbed the lantern and slowly began to follow down the stairs to the basement. She could hear the constant giggling of herself far down in the darkness. For some reason, she might have preferred silence. She hit the bottom of the stairs and looked up, expecting to see a basement. Instead, there was a long hallway before her, with a series of 4 wooden doors along it, with the final wooden door at the end. "Come on, let's play already," the chipper voice echoed through the hallway. Pinkie couldn't tell which direction it had come from. She slowly walked to the first door, opened it. And opened it. Entering slowly inside the room, she got a shock as she saw the familiar-looking living room from the farm. "Here, you should eat something," the ghostly image of her father said as he placed a bowl before the ghostly image of her younger self wrapped in a blanket. "I'm not hungry," her younger self softly muttered in response. She bundled herself up in a tightened blanket. "You haven't eaten anything since you got back. Please, you have to eat," her father said, sat down on the couch next to his daughter. "I don't ever want to eat again," young Pinkie Pie said, her voice quivering with fear. Her father placed his head around her shaking daughter, holding her close with his body. The images faded away. The room was quiet as Pinkie stared at the images she had just seen. Was that a memory? She asked herself. It wasn't a memory. She could remember. The words her father had spoken felt ominous, but she couldn't think of why they would seem that way. She saw something out of the corner of her eye, looking down on the table where the soup had been placed. On top of it was a green tile with the image of a cat on it. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she felt like it was something important. She quickly grabbed it and placed it in her bag. She then exited the room, closing the door behind her. "You do want to have fun, don't you?" came a cheerful voice echoing through the hallway once again. Pinkie ignored it for a moment, opening the door across from the first one. Inside the door she saw an interrogation room, one she would have seen in the local authorities when she was little. "Can't you see she's been through a lot?" the ghostly image of her mother told the ghostly police cult. She hugged her pink daughter. "Your questions are upsetting her." The pink filly was shaking in her mother's arms. "We apologize profusely. We're not trying to scare her, but we need to know what happened," the cult said reassuringly. "You need to give my daughter time," her father said adamantly. "This has been a tough time for all of us. We understand we have our condolences, but we need to know the details. Once we do, we can bring this whole affair to an end quickly," the cult returned. The images faded from the scene once more, leaving behind a pink tile in the interrogation table. It was another scene that didn't exist in her memories. This one confused her more than the last one, not knowing what reason she would have to be in an interrogation room like that. She examined the tile, seeing it was a picture of a bird on it. She quickly placed it in her bag before exiting the room as well. "Ooh, you're going to make me wait, aren't you?" the chipper Pinkie's voice echoed in the hallway, sounding disappointed. Pinkie softly shook her head. The voice of the other Pinkie was unsettling to her. Hearing herself talk without it being heard just felt unnatural. She carefully walked to the next door, opening it and stepping inside. This time she saw her bedroom from the farm. 3 beds filled the room, one for each of them as her parents had slept in a different room. "Come on, sis, you need to get some sleep. It's getting late," the ghostly image of her older sister Octavia was trying to comfort the young pink filly. They were sleeping in the same bed as her sister hugged her tightly. "I know you're having a hard time, but I'm here for you. You know I won't let anything happen to you." The young pink filly began to sob into Octavia's coat. The two embraced as the images faded once more. On the bed sat a red tie with a picture of a snake on it. Pinkie wiped away the tear that had begun to form on the edge of her eye. She didn't know why these emotions were welling up inside her. The images were too real not to be true, but why shouldn't she remember? She carefully placed the red tile in her bag before exiting the room. "Come on, I prepared a party for you and everything." She still sounded happy, but she was getting impatient. Pinkie shook her head softly. She had to see what was in this other door now. The other Pinkie could wait. She opened the final door. On the side of the hallway, stepping into a room that had its walls painted like the sky, and the ground was covered in sand and rocks. It looked like the outside of the rock farm. "So you're sure this is what you want?" her ghostly father asked her once again. "Yeah, it is. I don't think I should stay here anymore," her younger self responded slowly. "I understand," her mother commented, standing next to her father. "Just be careful out there, and I know you'll have Octavia with you." Are you sure you guys don't want to come? I don't know if I'll be coming back either, Octavia said from her younger sister to her parents. I was left this farm by my father. I can't just leave it now. Their father shook his head slowly. This farm is my whole life now, good and bad memories alike, so let's hope you can forgive us for not coming with you. Just please be safe. Don't worry, Father, I guarantee nothing shall happen, Octavia smiled. We trust you, Octavia, her mother nodded, tears in her eyes. The image faded as a blue tile of a fish sat in the middle of the room. That was when we left the farm, wasn't it? Pinkie thought, remembering having left the farm with her parents' approval, but she hadn't remembered that conversation before she had left. Yet, she's sure it had happened. All these images she had experienced when she was younger, yet she had forgotten them. Why would I have forgotten these memories? Pinkie asked herself as she walked over the blue tile before placing it in her bag. There must be a good reason why I've forgotten. Maybe the other Pinkie knows. She thought to herself as she exited the room. The other Pinkie voice huffed slowly. You're not very fun, Sadie Pie. If I was told I had been throwing a party, I would have just gone straight to it. The voice sounded like her patience was wearing thin. Pinkie walked down the rest of the length of the hallway, reaching the door at the end of it. She pushed open the door and walked inside. Oh, there you are. I was afraid you'd gotten lost somehow. Which would be weird. How do you get lost in a straight hallway? I mean, I'm sure that there's a way, but I'm sure you'd have to delay the party. But the other Pinkie stood in the middle of the room, illuminated by the lantern that hung from the ceiling. The rest of the room was pitch black except for the circle of light where she was. Pinkie carefully turned off her lantern before storing it in her bag, then turning to face herself. Tell me, you know what those images were about, don't you? She asked seriously as she could. The other Pinkie frowned. What, you made me wait for that? That's not very nice, she said, giving a huff. But I'll forgive you. After all, now that you're here, we can have fun together, she bounced happily. Please, I want to have fun as much as you do, but I can't enjoy myself until I find the answers. Pinkie shook herself. What happened to Ponyville? Why are there monsters? Why am I seeing the images I'm seeing? I want nothing more than to go back to throwing parties and hanging out with my friends, she lowered her head a little. But I can, not so long as all these questions are eating me up inside. The other Pinkie stopped bouncing and seemed to frown. Fine, I see how it is. The other Pinkie turned around. I guess I'll have to remove the sadness from you, Sadie Pie. Pinkie blinked in confusion. She had no idea what the other Pinkie Pie meant, but she had answered any of her birdie questions. Her thoughts were stopped as her heart sunk. Her ears could only hear a siren go off. The light in the room was dimming, turning pitch black slowly. Oh no, 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 no. She thought, began to panic as light faded completely. She tried to brace herself for anything. The world was changing. She could feel it shifting under her hooves. As the siren began to die out, the lantern began to flicker back to life, re-illuminating the spot where the other Pinkie was standing. The ground around them had turned into a rotting, grime-covered floor that had appeared the first time she had heard the siren. The other Pinkie Pie still standing where she had been. The only difference was now she was wearing a strange dress with wings. As the other Pinkie turned around, the photograph came to life with static. You know, the other Pinkie Pie spoke up. Playing with myself really might be the most fun I'll ever have. She let out a soft chuckle, turning around to fully give Pinkie Pie a full view of the outfit. I'll have to make it last, but all things do come to an end. Pinkie stared at the outfit, beginning to notice the details she'd wished she hadn't. The wings on her back, 6 in total, each a different color, and were crudely stitched on. Around her neck was a necklace made of multiple unicorn horns dangling from it. The cloth of her dress was made to look like a patchwork quilt made of leather. Each square of the dress made a different cutie mark on it. Oh, do you like my dress? The other Pinkie noticed a gaping stare. The other Pinkie angled her body to show it off better. I'm so glad you like it. I worked really hard to make it. It wasn't easy getting everything to be so intact. Ponies really like to squirm, you know. She laughed as she gently played with one of her wings. I'm quite proud of how it came out, too. I must admit, I see something I can add to it that would make it even better. The lantern growing brighter, illuminating more of the room, revealing a table that had been hidden in the darkness. The other Pinkie Pie turned and walked towards the table, reaching into a medical bag that was placed on it. From the bag, she pulled out a large, sharp butcher's knife. Now be a good pony and hold still, will you? I don't want to mess up that beautiful cutie mark of yours, the other Pinkie said as she was natural thing. Before putting the butcher's knife in her mouth, the phonograph began to let out its wailing rings. Pinky's heart felt like it stopped. She couldn't even comprehend that this other Pinky was saying, but it was clear that the other Pinky was going to give her a chance. As soon as the other Pinky began to charge full gallop at her, the other Pinky appeared to be aiming at her for her legs. She jumped out of the way as the knife came close to cutting deep into her. She tried to back up away from the other Pinky into the darkness where she hid something hard. She looked behind her as if it was following her eyes. A lantern hanging from the ceiling glowed brighter, revealing the entire room to her. She had just run into the dried remains of a pony hanging from the ceiling by a butcher's hook. She jumped away, not wanting to even touch this. Her eyes quickly began to see the decorations of the room. She felt her stomach reach her throat. Pony bodies hung from several parts of the room. Their bodies, dried in caked pools of blood, laid underneath them. Skulls decorated the walls, while the furniture was made up of bones and skin. Balloons floated that were dyed with blood. Streamers and ribbons that had been given the same treatment. Piles of body parts and organs laid stacked in corners of the room. On the table, with the medical bag appeared in the darkness and hid it before, was a plate adorned with 4 folds surrounding it, with a pile of cupcakes in the center of the plate. Her ears twitched as she heard the galloping hoofs and jumped into the air as the sound of a blade began to struck, swelling at the body she had just run into. Pinky ran away from the twisted version of herself, panting heavily as she galloped to the other side of the room. She turned around, watching as the other pulled the knife out of the body. "Sandy Pie, it isn't any fun if you just keep running," the other Pinky said cheerfully, pulling the knife out of the body. "I admire you, though. You have the will to fight. I like that in a pony." She chuckled happily as she placed the knife back into her mouth. The other Pinky said everything that same happy voice. It terrified her, thinking that such things could be said with such a happy tone. That Pinky had every intention of killing her, and not quickly. It was obvious she wanted to make it slow, a painful process. The other Pinky was charging again. She could dodge it from a long distance, though, and jumped out of the way, avoiding Pinky. "Gosh!" she cried as a searing pain sailed across her right leg. She stumbled away as she looked at the other Pinky, who was giggling, blood dripping from the end of the butcher's knife. The other Pinky had tilted her head and changed her direction. When she dodged, the knife had cut deeply into her leg. She could feel the blood trickling down it. With a playful hoof stomp, the other Pinky broke into another charge straight for her. She mustered all her strength to jump away. "Gosh!" she let out another painful cry as the gash cut down on her leg, causing her to trip and collapse to the ground. Her leg twitched in pain as it reached diagonally down from her leg. She was severely bleeding now. The other Pinky was able to maneuver too well for her to dodge. The attacks had all but immobilized her movement now. "I give you an A for effort, but a C for execution. That gives you a good round B," the other Pinky cheered happily for her. "I do hope you won't completely give up once you lose your legs, though. I know it'll be tough, but keep on fighting." The twisted words sounded so cheerful and sickened Pinky. She had turned her head to watch the other Pinkie Pie put the knife back in her mouth. She had come back from behind and was raising her head now. She could only bring the knife down, bring it right on her leg. With all her might, she pulled her leg back in as the other Pinky began to throw her head down with all her might to chop her leg off. Pinky bucked with the leg all her might into the other Pinky's jaw. A loud crack sounded through the Pinkie Pie and felt the body of the other Pinky fly backwards away from her. She heard a loud thud, followed by a clanging of a knife hitting the hard ground. She panted in pain, trying not to focus as much on the bleeding legs. She turned her head weakly and looked at the direction the other Pinky had flown. The other Pinky groaned. Having landed on her back, she rolled over, lying on the ground. Her head wobbled. Her mouth had been bleeding severely. She coughed and hacked, bits of teeth and chunks of blood flying out. She panted as best she could through the blood oozing out of her mouth. "Woof, poof," the other Pinky tried to speak, but she sputtered out what sounded like nonsense. She looked in pain and tried to speak, but she turned to wobbly hooves. Pinky slowly got to her hooves as well, putting the weight of her injured legs and made a bloody cry for relief as she did the best to silence her cries. "Oh, no, foof, foof." The other Pinky sputtered more blood as she gripped the butcher's knife as best she could with her hoof, dragging it along the ground as she began to walk towards Pinky. Pinky took in sharp breaths of air as she concentrated on the vile pink mare before her. The other Pinky began to pick up the pace before going into a full-out run straight for Pinky. She seemed groggy but determined to bring that knife down in Pinky's flesh. Pinky aimed the uninjured half of her body at the other Pinky, bringing her hind hoof up once more. The butcher's knife was raised in the air, sparks flying as it scraped along the ground. The frantic rush of the other Pinky was closing in, ready to strike down. For a moment, everything seemed to hold still. Right at the edge of death, two forces that never should have met collided. The butcher's knife through the air, impaling itself in the ground. A loud crunch sound broke through the air. Pinky's hind leg had struck, landing it all its might straight into the victim's throat. The other Pinky's eyes shrunk as her windpipe crushed, her forward energy being matched by the stomping force of the kick. Her body betrayed itself as it swung itself free to the ground. Her whole being shifted out from under her power, the power of the kick, hitting the ground with a hard thud. That Pinky jerked and twitched on the ground as it had tried with all its might to get air of its broken windpipe, but only to be filled with blood pouring freely from the neck. She jerked and squirmed, her eyes rolling in the back of her head. It seemed to last for an eternity, but the body finally stopped squirming as life escaped it. The only thing that could be heard was the loud panting of Pinkie Pie. Her phonograph had gone silent. She stared at the corpse that lay before her. She saw herself dead, killed by her own hoof. She seemed to be numb to the pain that was trying to course through her body. Her mind beginning to fall into a haze from the amount of blood she was losing down her legs. It seemed insignificant at the moment. All she could do was stare numbly at the lifeless body before her. Nothing else seemed to exist in the world. However, her mind began to receive the signals her body was sending. She needed medical attention. Her legs became shaky as she finally began to take her first step. She limped, putting as little pressure on her injured legs as possible. Over to the medical bag, she carefully pried it open, looking inside. There were many sharp instruments, scalpels, syringes filled with strange liquid, even a saw for cutting bones. However, she saw a roll of gauze bandages. She carefully grabbed it. Pulling it out of the bag, she unrolled the length of it before carefully but tightly wrapping it around her wounds. She wrapped slowly but surely, wrapping up the large cut on her hind leg, then the smaller cut on her front leg. The bandages quickly soaked with blood, but they would seal her wounds for the time being. She placed the remaining gauze inside her bag and then turned towards the exit. She slowly limped her way back to the grimy hallway. Walking past the steel doors, she carefully began to climb up the stairs, her wounds slipping once or twice due to the grime that had grown all over them. The climb was slow. Her body ached from pain and exhaustion, but she made her way to the top. She slowly walked across the rotting floor of Sugar Cube Corner, heading straight to one of the grime-covered counters. In a dry spot on the counter sat a brown bottle, labeled of it called Health Drink. Pinky's dull mind pulled the cap off with her mouth before taking it and drinking the whole thing. The drink tasted like a mix of bitter herbs and strawberries for flavor. It was a lot like drinking medicine, but her body was grateful for having the liquid inside of her. She placed the empty bottle back down on the counter and slowly trudged to the middle of Sugar Cube Corner. She laid down, panting heavily as the haze of her mind finally came over her as she went into an uncomfortable sleep.